All right, Dr. Ali, thank you for coming back on to talk about another topic that should be very valuable to people, which is the immune system. There's a lot of misconceptions out there regarding the immune system, and one of the things that we've been hearing a lot in particular lately is how the Epstein-Barr virus causes autoimmune diseases. But yet 90 to 95% of people actually carry EBV. So the question I have for you is why don't 90 to 95% of people then develop autoimmune diseases? Most people watching this aren't actually subscribed, which means they're missing a lot of what we're putting out. So if you're getting value from this video, then subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't actually miss it.
Well, firstly, let's start with, I want to just do a little brief intro on what an autoimmune disease even is. Now, frankly, Brendan, I've wanted to be able to identify different patterns and, really identify underlying diseases, especially ones that are known as great imitators, right? That's whatever it may be, lupus, tuberculosis, sarcoidosis, syphilis, etc. And in order for someone to really be able to identify patterns across diseases all over, for someone to be a true diagnostician, in my opinion, you have to be properly specialized in rheumatology and immunology. Otherwise, you have no business in that specialty to begin with. Now, with the whole Epstein-Barr virus craze that I have seen on Instagram, and I'm sure you've seen on Instagram, where some dude who looks like he's just a gym bro in general trying to do a doctor's job, they will basically make these videos where they are behind very professional looking sets, Sjogren experience like level sets, and they would be telling people, well, the reason you have Hashimoto's is Epstein-Barr virus, and that's the real reason, and it pokes holes and makes holes in your thyroid, and that's it. The reason they are doing that primarily is for someone to hear that, someone with Hashimoto's, and they will go and get a panel of whatever viruses they may have. And like you said, 9 out of 10 people pretty much have Epstein-Barr virus or carry it in some way, shape, or form. And so they will look at those results and be like, holy wow, Mr. Idiot was right. I have EBV. This must be causing my autoimmune disease. What they're trying to do really is find some form of pattern that is abundant in GenPop, right? And if you find a pattern that's abundant in GenPop that GenPop doesn't know about, and you tell them this is the cause of all their ailments, now, some guy who doesn't even know anything about anything is telling you that you have an autoimmune disease due to one virus or another, and you, not you, but the viewer, being someone who's not versed in medical terminology and medical research in general, history, everything, classification, diagnosis, etc., they will have the tendency to just cling on to whatever leg seems to offer them help. And that is, I would blame primarily the, public healthcare systems in countries for having very poor education about that topic in general. But to go back to your original question, which is, since 9 out of 10 people, I forget the number was like 89 to 93% or something crazy like that, have
Roughly.
EBV or carry it in some way, shape, or form. Why doesn't everybody have autoimmune diseases, right? So the answer would be divided into two separate, let's say, variations of the same answer. One is the general, let's say FDA approved answer, which is that, EBV will only raise risk, and this is risk stratification, and people don't understand risk. And because of that, they misinterpret the whole thing, and maybe Epstein-Barr virus is responsible for all this and that and blah, 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 blah. But the more real answer, in my opinion, the practical answer, the one that's trying to describe reality in words as accurately as possible, is that people have different propensities and different tendencies to developing autoimmune diseases. I have seen people in the immunology ward with no Epstein-Barr virus, not many of them, sure, but they are in the immunology ward with quite severe autoimmune diseases, be that lupus, be something like psoriatic arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, etc. So it's really not as clear-cut as Mr. Idiot, whoever he is making it out to be on Instagram and saying that this is the reason for all of your blah, blah, blah. And then it's going to be CMV and whatever it may be, 50 to 70% of people have CMV, maybe whatever. Or it's going to be HSV2, HHV2, human herpes virus 2 or 6, that most people have and is quite benign. So a lot of these little viruses that people have, which, I mean, generally speaking, of course, they can be somewhat pathogenetic, as you've mentioned before, in regards to certain clients of ours when they would have these viruses, and that would lead them to developing autoimmune disease later in life. That is probable, and that is feasible to say. But it's not to say that if you have whatever it may be, human herpes virus 6 or cytomegalovirus or Epstein-Barr virus, that doesn't mean it's a death sentence in a way, and it doesn't even have to mean a raised risk just due to that virus. I think trying to generalize everything is a way for whoever it may be to try and tap into a much larger market, which is everybody.
Yeah, and I think that's very well said. And it is really a result of the educational system around this being quite poor. I mean, I've actually read some of the literature myself, and I've seen authors actually propose that EBV was the cause of things like multiple sclerosis, you know, and it's just not the case. Although one thing I will say is that, of course, if you already have a suppressed immune system, which is not only suppressed, but dysfunctional, which may even occur as a result of having some severe viral infections or even other bacterial infections, which definitely can take a toll on the immune system, then yeah, having underlying viruses and stuff in addition in that case can amplify a risk potentially for developing an autoimmune disease. But it's not the virus itself, it's more so that it can potentially play a role after your immune system is already under a serious threat to begin with and depleted and becoming dysfunctional. So I guess
In the case
next...
of, I'm sorry, yeah, go on. My latency.
No, go ahead.
Please go on. Well, I was going to touch on multiple sclerosis specifically in the context of Epstein-Barr virus. So that is a misconception where the real connection between them is not if you have EBV, you're at a higher risk of MS. It's more like if you've had an episode of an EBV infection that resulted in infectious mononucleosis, then you're at a much higher risk of MS. The numbers are pretty crazy there, so there's definitely a positive association there. Well, positive not meaning advantageous, but positive correlation, mathematically speaking. There definitely is a solid connection there for sure. However, I would definitely think that if one were to have an episode of infectious mononucleosis, well, number one, there must have been something wrong to begin with for them to actually get that severe of a condition from Epstein-Barr virus, which the vast majority of people get and don't even notice, right? Versus somebody who's had an episode of actual infectious mononucleosis, which is contagious and can be quite horrible, especially when gotten earlier in life. Now, in that regard, there had to have been, in my opinion, something, whether it be an increased propensity to immunosuppression, whether that be a disadvantageous environment, whether that be suboptimal intake of foods or pollution at home with mycotoxins, with heavy metals of sorts, with low protein as well, low vitamin intake, a mother that maybe had autoimmune disease underlying and breastfed the child with a lot of autoantibodies, not knowingly so, not blaming anybody, of course. I'm just talking about the actual complexity and nuance of the whole situation of autoimmune diseases. And this is a field of medicine that I've dedicated half a decade to, at the very least, frankly. So the reductionist attitude in autoimmune diseases, where it's like, yeah, this is caused by this is caused by that. It is absolutely horseshit, garbage, not true at all. It's a fabrication of reality, in my opinion, as autoimmune diseases will start off in somebody coming on either gradually and sort of coming on slow and then getting so severe later, or they can start off very severe early in life, or someone could be completely asymptomatic until their 60s or 70s. All of those are feasible. As autoimmune disease is I would say at its core, it is metabolic, potentially genetic, definitely environmental, and all of these factors are playing in together in an interconnected fashion for them to manifest so severely as a disease. As the human body is crazy regenerative, as you know, Brendan. We've had people come to us with debilitating autoimmune diseases that have gone completely undiagnosed for decades, right? And then within 2 to 3 months on an adequate targeted peptide and drug protocol, as well as supplements on top and at correcting nutrient deficiencies, we've had success ranging from a massive reduction in symptoms. We've never had failure, frankly, not that I know of, and up to complete remission, up to even total reversal and having antibodies go from positive to zero, including in severe diseases like scleroderma and lupus. And yeah, so go on.
Yeah, I think you did a very good job touching on that. And I will just add that a lot of people these days are exposed to more viruses than ever before. I mean, of course, we did have the COVID-19 pandemic, you can call it, I guess, which may have been overblown. But one of the things that we have seen in some people who develop severe cases of COVID, and just the fact that they do develop a severe case of COVID-19 to begin with, we could say is due to them not having as robust of an immune system as somebody else. So maybe they had a poor diet with micronutrient deficiencies like vitamin D, zinc, and vitamin C, and so on. Or maybe they were living under high periods of stress with not getting much sleep, which could have also negatively impacted their thymus and their bone marrow and their immune system overall. And so they get a severe COVID-19 infection. One of the things that we have seen in these cases is that they are associated with a higher risk of developing new autoimmune conditions. And you also see in long COVID patients, for instance, that they get this excessive inflammatory signaling, especially from monocytes and macrophages. And I think that these longer term infections that people are dealing with can also negatively impact them on an epigenetic level, which can predispose them or put them at higher risk for, say, autoimmune diseases as well. And so one of the things that I would like to talk about that we have seen with clients, we've gotten very good results for clients with various autoimmune conditions just through the use of various peptides, especially peptides which are derived from the thymus, the bone marrow, and I will even say the pineal gland and also the entire neuroendocrine system. So pineal gland, pituitary, and so on. These peptides have shown to have very promising effects in autoimmune conditions. I mean, we have seen, for instance, the thymus peptides, including Vilon, be studied in the context of long COVID and severe COVID cases in which there were cytokine storms going on and people had very high levels of inflammatory cytokines. And yet these thymus peptides have been able to actually reduce the excessive inflammatory cytokines like interleukin-6 and TNF-alpha. And there's been lots of improvements that we have seen with them, including even Vilon in particular, improving the expression of interleukin-2, which is a very good interleukin that determines how well somebody actually recovers their immune system following an infection. But in addition to that, like you touched on before, Ali, there are some people who are at higher risk of autoimmune diseases just from exposure to environmental toxins, and especially mycotoxins are very common a cause of autoimmune problems, especially in regards to type 1 diabetes, in which case there are antibodies that can develop that destroy the pancreas. And so, yeah, that's another thing, in addition to, of course, genetics. But another thing that we should touch on that would really help people better understand is what actually prevents the immune system from attacking your own body in the first place. And would you like to answer that?
Absolutely. Now, I did actually mention this quote in the last video we had, so there might be some deja vu to the viewers. But Voltaire, who is seen as one of the pioneers, really, of the medical world. I mean, back then, there wasn't much medicine compared to now, of course. But Voltaire said, and this quote quite literally haunts me sometimes, that the art of medicine, I'm paraphrasing, but the art of medicine lies in amusing the patient while nature cures the disease. Meaning that frankly, how I interpret this is that back then, due to the absence of pollution, it was 17th century, 18th century, something like that. And due to the absence of environmental pollutants, at least in the concentration that we have today, as well as the absence of garbage food, as well as, frankly, the lack of a sedentary lifestyle back then. Now, you will see a pattern amongst athletes in studies as well as in real life that they have a very, very low rate of autoimmune diseases. Not that they don't have them. Of course they have them. You know, pretty much any way you may classify, divide or categorize the population in any way, shape, or form, you'll see some sort of autoimmune disease presence in that categorization that you actually do divide the world into. But back then, the absence of pollutants definitely not reduced, but let's say didn't induce a propensity and tendency in people to actually develop autoimmune conditions. Not only that, but also I wanted to touch on what you mentioned about long COVID. Now, long COVID in and of itself is not completely proven. It's kind of like fibromyalgia, where it's like, whatever, like let's give it a name, right? But but in quote unquote long COVID. Now, this is more of a syndrome than a disease, in my opinion, because if it did happen, well, it seems to be prevalently among people who got the shot. Okay, don't hate the player, hate the game. That's what's happening. I'm just describing reality, right? And for that to happen, for you to be forced to sort of endure a long period of horror and terror going on inside your body, which is really, the cytokine storm is a war going on within one's own body. For that to happen, there must have been something wrong initially. I mean, have you ever, I have not heard of a single person who was, let's say, an NFL athlete, right? Great running back of sorts who didn't get the shot at all and then suddenly happened to have long COVID, the poor bastard. Like, that just doesn't happen. It's usually people who've gotten too many shots, especially a lot of boosters and repeated boosters. And I've seen those examples in my family, unfortunately. And
yeah,
a lot of it is as well as people who've not been metabolically healthy. A lot of it is in vegans, okay? And that is a fact. A lot of it is in vegans. And for all of that to happen, like I said, there must have been something wrong initially. What would cause the immune system to attack the body? I would say, frankly, the human body as a whole is quite miraculous. You know, no matter how much you study in medicine and biology, there's always new things to learn about the human body. Anybody who claims to know anything is a complete fucking idiot. So in that regard, the human body, as we grow up, antibody production starts to get faulty one way or another, be that due to DNA damage or DNA damage combined with the toxin exposure, especially mycotoxins, as you've mentioned. Now, there's a lot more mold seemingly in homes that now is a light is being shined on them that I haven't seen before, frankly. For someone before Legionnaire's disease, for example, it was like wow, like that's quite an atypical diagnosis. Right? Because Legionnaires can be a great imitator, just like lupus, just like sarcoidosis, like tuberculosis, syphilis, etc. But right now, you see a lot more people with Legionnaires. I've seen a lot more people with Legionnaires in hospitals here in Russia. That's not the USA, right? So for someone to actually prevent their immune system from attacking itself, there has been a tremendous, groundbreaking level of success of that in the elimination diet community. And I can attest to that. I can really give a testimonial for that on my own, as I've had 6 autoimmune diseases since I was 14, right?
Yeah.
Now I have lived in, so I'm just using my own example, not narcissistically, but for knowledge. I've lived in a quite heavily polluted area in Lebanon my whole life, right? What does that tell you? It tells you that there's a lot of bone marrow damage that happened and accumulated over time. Now, that is true with mycotoxins. That is true with environmental pollutants, especially areas with a lot of coal mining and using coal for a lot of fuel. Gas is not so much better, but it is better than coal. So all of those combined, as well as a genetic predisposition where families that have a lot of autoimmune disease, that tends to run down and up, frankly. Maybe not so much up as the times were different back then, but recently you would see that. So autoimmune diseases used to be mostly a female thing. In the 50s, 60s, 70s, those were mostly a female thing. Now I see patients equally, from both sexes in terms of autoimmune disease.
Yeah. And another thing I will add onto that is Tregs are also very important for maintaining the proper functioning of the immune system. And there is one protein called FOXP3, which is actually what makes a T cell become a true T regulatory cell, which is characterized by them having both CD4 and CD25 markers. And these T regulatory cells, what we have seen in rodent studies, for instance, is when we remove them in mice, they develop severe autoimmune diseases. And then when you put them back into the mice, they actually go into remission. So if you could support your Tregs as well and their function, then you can decrease the likelihood or severity of autoimmune conditions as well. And that's where things get interesting, because we do have a lot of tools at our disposal nowadays. There's a lot of things that are relatively unknown, but yet can assist here in terms of helping one's immune system maintain proper functioning. And so one of the things we have seen, Ali, is small peptides being able to help restore immune system, I'll say, regulation, and also like reprogramming the immune system in a way that can reduce or even put into remission the vast majority of autoimmune conditions, at least to a significant extent. And so do you want to touch a little bit on some of the results that we have seen with using different peptides for various autoimmune conditions, and how these have given results that are just much more effective than doing a program without the peptides?
Absolutely. And by the way, I am impressed you brought up T regulatory cells, as those are heavily implicated in even the more common ones like rheumatoid arthritis. They're present but malfunctional, let's say, particularly around the joints.
Yeah.
And in lupus, they are very, very heavily dysfunctional. And even in multiple sclerosis, which is, the whole, like the main connection idiots made with Epstein-Barr virus, also over there, Tregs are dysfunctional. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, so do you want to give literal examples that we've had?
Well, I mean, we have seen conditions of, say, rheumatoid arthritis in clients, and also including in my own mother, who have basically completely beaten the condition. So clinically, it's referred to as remission, right? But if you consider an autoimmune disease as a dysfunction of the immune regulatory system itself, then if you can essentially correct the dysfunction in the immune regulatory system, then in my mind, at least, that's essentially a cure to the condition, despite what they may refer to it as clinically only being a remission. But yes, we have seen cases where we've seen severe rheumatoid arthritis, very high levels of C-reactive protein, very severe joint pain that has gone on for years, honestly. And autoimmune titers were definitely up a good bit, like quite significantly. And yet, through the implementation of a strategic choice of peptides, we have been able to see these conditions not only improve the patient's condition, like subjectively, but also improve their blood markers. For instance, their antibodies for rheumatoid arthritis, their rheumatoid factor, as well as, say, their C-reactive protein and their sedimentation rate.
And
We've seen
anti-CCP.
Yeah, we've seen all of this stuff go back into normal range just through the
Or
use
to
of
zero,
peptides.
literally to
Yeah.
absolute zero.
And in some cases, we've seen like this essentially be a cure, like even after the peptides are discontinued after an aggressive course, that their symptoms do not come back. And we've also seen this also in the case of many different autoimmune diseases. I will give another example, which is in the case of type 1 diabetes, in which there were 2 out of 3 antibodies present that were attacking the pancreas, and we were able to actually stabilize the person's condition, and they no longer have type 1 diabetes. So, I mean, that's quite significant, and I don't know if you've seen other cases with your clients in particular, Ali, or if these two examples are the only ones you know of. Would you like to give any other
No,
examples?
we've had quite a lot of examples, including, well, I had a patient, well, really, yeah, a patient with both scleroderma and lupus nephritis, right? ANA was, I think it was at 1 to 200 titer, I believe, and then it went down to 0. The anti-SCL70, which is a scleroderma antibody, was also a strong positive and had gone down to 0. Specifically, yeah, with a cocktail that's, of course, primarily composed of peptides as the base, you might need to. So I am iffy about a little bit mentioning this because I don't want anybody to get any ideas that they can cure autoimmune diseases at home, right? Because that is not really the case. I mean, in certain cases where the autoimmune disease is mild, you may just be able to get away really with some thymus peptides and some bone marrow peptides, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, it may depend on like how high their titers actually are and how long that they've been elevated for as well, which could determine the results that somebody gets. Obviously, if you catch something sooner rather than later, you'll be able to have a higher success rate than if you caught something that's already been going on and progressing for like 20 plus years, then obviously it's going to take a much more aggressive course of action in order to resolve that case. So there's not a one size fits all. It will depend on a lot of things in terms of how aggressive the autoimmune disease is, how long it's been going on for, the overall condition of the patient in particular. And not only is it peptides, I mean, they are definitely a key, right? Like they're a star of this show here, essentially. But the peptides also eat up certain micronutrients and minerals that are going to be required in order to restore the immune system, And it could be the case that somebody has also been chronically deficient in these for years, and that can also be a contributing factor. But there's a lot of things that can go into it. But yeah, so what we do see with these small chain peptides, especially the Khavinson's peptides, is that they work on an epigenetic level as well. So the epigenetic patterns that can develop around some autoimmune conditions, they're not set in stone. It's actually a misconception that autoimmune diseases can't improve, or that you can't improve the epigenetics around them in order to improve the condition. We see that with, say, thymus peptides in particular, they interact with certain genes and regulation of those genes in a way that can set the epigenetic path in the right direction in the long term. So it interacts with the chromatin structure and the histone proteins that control the chromatin wrapping around the genes, and it can help to tighten or loosen that chromatin around particular genes in a way that will be most beneficial for that gene's signaling, and that can set into an epigenetic regulation of certain genes, which can then put you on the right path for autoimmune diseases. And we've seen in the cases of, say, T lymphocytes, for instance, which not only do they go down in number as you age and get older, the bigger problem is that they lose some of their function, right? They become less functional than they were in your youth. Well, with these peptides, for instance, you can return the T cell's function to a level that is similar to it was in its youth or its prime. So you can really restore the function of T cells even with some of these peptides as well.
Well, just in Peptide Science Institute, frankly, we've had the success of reversing so many of these autoimmune diseases with primarily peptides, even in some cases without having to deploy any immunosuppressants, because the clients were very risk averse in that regard. Even though I don't think there's anything wrong with deploying an immunosuppressant strategy for somebody, particularly if it's short term.
Well, we did have to in one case, Ali. If you remember that one case of lupus in a patient who was also suffering from heart failure, we had to implement prednisone, at least initially, in order to get it under control, because some peptides and other things that we implement in the program, they don't work immediately, and especially in severe cases, where you got to get a disease under control, you may have to use things such as prednisone, or you may have to use like a biologic or something like that initially until you can actually start to restore the proper functioning of the immune system with peptides. But then what we've seen is that later on, we can often then taper off the biologic or the prednisone. We no longer need them because we've gotten it under control enough that they're just simply not needed. And then they can continue on the course of peptides for a prolonged period of time. And it's been very effective at getting autoimmune conditions under control.
Just for the for the viewers to actually have some examples, that includes quite severe conditions like giant cell arteritis, giant cell myocarditis, antiphospholipid syndrome. All of those we've had clients with. There was one, I believe, with thrombotic thrombocytopenic purpura. We had several sarcoidosis cases and neurosarcoidosis in a certain biker or a cyclist, I believe it was neurosarcoidosis, and so the list goes on, including Takayasu arteritis and so on. But the main thing I wanted to get here is that we are not anti-immunosuppressants. So, like, believe me, this is a very nuanced topic in and of itself. Throughout history, it's been nuanced in the case of immunosuppression being a part of a complex polypharmacy-based treatment protocol for someone with autoimmune disease. However, I am definitely against Crohn's disease as well, psoriatic arthritis, psoriasis. We've had all of those. Now, in those particular cases, there is nothing wrong with deploying a bit of a. So, imagine there's a city made of 2 separate islands, let's say, okay, and in order for someone to get from island A to island B, there has to be a bridge. Okay, let's say Island A is horrible, it's not where you want to be, and that's the autoimmune disease state. Island B is where you want to go, and there's no autoimmune disease. A bridge may be necessary, and that bridge may have to consist of immunosuppressants, right? There will have to be a blast phase consisting of polypharmacy, consisting of a lot of different peptides, consisting of supplements, nutrient deficiencies, correcting those, etc. A nutritional protocol, moving, so an exercise protocol of sorts. Stretching can actually improve autoimmune diseases, believe it or not. Now, that blast phase will be connected later to more of a cruise phase. Let's to use bodybuilder terminology. That the cruise phase will be more of a maintenance protocol for someone to actually have to keep their results long term. So that will include the peptides that would be, in my opinion, potentially able to, potentially something that we could put in the drinking water, like Pinolon, like Visugen, like Vilon, like Epitalon, etc. Those are things you already produce yourself. We are just raising the concentrations of those perpetually in your body. You can. So I'm a fan of never coming off those peptides, frankly, and I'm sure Brendan is too. But some people do have the concern of, well, what if I have to stay on? I don't want to stay on them for too long. They're expensive. They're this, they're that. You can get a huge chunk of the benefits just by cycling them on and off. Okay, but the main low-hanging fruit here, in my opinion, is you want to take, number one, enough. So you want to dose them properly. And number two, you want to take them for long enough. So you want to take a lot of them, and you want to take them for a long time for them to actually induce the epigenetic changes and resulting in actually protein expression changes. So they would make something like, we've had a client with glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency in whom we've corrected that deficiency. How did we do that? Did we do genetic engineering in him? No, we just altered his epigenetics, and we altered the way his body expresses proteins there. And there is no reason to think that that cannot be induced and seen, and the benefits of which can be reaped in numerous autoimmune diseases of varying kinds, of varying intensities.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And another thing that I forgot to mention, which is just I guess a low-hanging fruits for people, because most people can get access to this very easily. It's available pretty much anywhere, is the peptide known as glutathione. What we see in autoimmune conditions is there's generally more oxidative stress, and also the patients that typically have autoimmune diseases, they often have deficient levels of endogenous production of glutathione. And so when you give glutathione even to people with autoimmune conditions, you see the antibody titers go down in pretty much any autoimmune disease. There's so many examples that exist in the literature of the antibody titers dropping after the administration of glutathione. So that's just another thing that's interesting that you could add on It's not just that we're talking about Khavinson's peptides here, but there is something I actually forgot about, Ali, which was the fact that I used to have Sjogren's disease. And I forgot
Yep.
about it because, it's not something I'm thinking about or actively dealing with every day like I used to be, kind of like how when I actually had it at the time, I had it for so long that I just kind of got used to it and I didn't think anything of it. But yes, I used to have Sjogren's disease, and I actually defeated this with just the use of certain peptides, which I've taken for a period of time. And you made a very good point as well. I think a lot of people don't actually get the results that they want as a result of not taking the peptides for a long enough period of time. Oftentimes we'll see people come to us saying that they've taken this peptide for a month and they didn't notice too much, and it may be that
I
they
would
didn't select the
I would
best
like to
peptides
point
for,
out
yeah.
I would like to point out that Brendan actually is an athlete, and he's been an athlete his whole life. And when he got Sjogren's syndrome, okay, he was able to get away with 2 bioregulator products, just 2 of them, not even changing his diet, no elimination diet, nothing like that. Didn't alter his
Yeah.
supplement stack. He was taking the least peptides of his whole life since I've met him. Okay, and he was able to get away with just 2 bioregulator products to completely reverse his Sjogren's syndrome, completely.
Mhm. Yeah, and this was over a year ago, I believe, approximately. It must have been, yeah, about a year, and the symptoms have just never come back. So I mean, it truly did work. It was very effective, but you got to make sure that you actually use them for a long enough period of time, in addition to, of course, selecting the proper ones for the job as well, and
I
dosing
see you
them properly.
blinking. I see you blinking so liberally, that's Sjogren's
Yeah,
never
yeah.
coming back.
I mean, I never used to blink. People would comment on my older videos. If people don't believe me, you can look back at those. There was a time that I would just never blink throughout any of my videos, and it's because I had Sjogren's, and now I don't, and I blink all the time. So, yeah.
I
But
remember at first you told me, wow, the saliva is so annoying. It's so much.
it was annoying at first, because I wasn't used to it. And I've had to swallow like all the time because I had so much saliva production, and it felt abnormal to me, even though it was technically considered normal. Nowadays, I'm just used to it. But another thing that I wanted to touch on is one thing that we discovered regarding multiple sclerosis. And if peptides are able to retrain the immune system to stop attacking the nervous system in the brain in multiple sclerosis. There's an interesting piece of research that I came across, and the reason I came across this in the first place is because we were doing an analysis on a peptide hydrolysis known as cerebrolysin. This is a brain peptide hydrolysis, which contains hundreds of different peptides in its composition, and we were testing it in the lab to determine its actual composition and what peptides in it are related to certain types of proteins or are components of a larger protein. We wanted to figure that out. And so we did sequence it entirely on HPLC and mass spectrometry. And there was just one peptide that I found that really stood out to me. And it was a peptide fragment from myelin basic protein. And it was within a specific region of this protein that this peptide was extracted. And it was like 14 amino acids long, roughly, 14 or 15. And so I was doing more research into this particular peptide to see if it's been studied anywhere before. Turns out that it has been, and it was specifically studied in multiple sclerosis in rodents. So they induced multiple sclerosis in these rodents by some model. I can't remember the exact one. And they used this particular peptide delivered in the intraspinal fluid. So it was injected that way. Yeah, it's a very interesting delivery method there. But what they found is that when they administered this peptide, that it essentially put the multiple sclerosis almost into a complete remission. Not entirely, but very significantly so. And I mean, that really just speaks on the power of some of these peptides. It was essentially retraining the immune system in a way that it was no longer attacking itself. So we have seen this with many peptides that can essentially reprogram the immune system so that it functions properly. And whether that's acting on the FOXP3 protein in particular to enhance Tregs and Tregs function, or if it's working through some other mechanisms, it's not entirely 100% clear because it hasn't been like specifically researched in a way that figures out its exact mechanisms in immune regulation. But yes, we know that they're very effective. We know that they're safe, of course. This peptide that was extracted from cerebrolysine is, of course, safe. I mean, cerebrolysine has been used for like 70 years in multiple countries throughout Europe, you know, and the Khavinson's peptides, which are able to retrain the immune system as well, predominantly ones from the thymus and the bone marrow and the pineal gland and so on, because you get these lymphoid progenitor cells from your bone marrow that end up in your thymus, which your thymus matures your T cells. And, you know, these are the main components of your immune system. And we know that these peptides can restore and stimulate all of these components of the immune system. And they're safe. You know, they've been used at doses which exceed the therapeutic dose by like 1,000 times. And administered over the course of 6 months, and like with a complete laboratory workup following the 6 months compared to baseline. And there's like no signs of toxicity. There's also imaging studies checking all organs afterwards, and there's no signs of toxicity. So these peptides have been used for such a long period of time that, you know, we know that they're safe. And I think the fact that we don't know the exact mechanism, like down to a T, is no problem in this case, because like I said, they are safe peptides to use, you know. But there's definitely more research that can be done in this area. It's just kind of a shame that you don't see much research being conducted into the Khavinson's peptides, for instance, nowadays, you know. But
it is quite shocking that Khavinson's peptides are not really researched, especially in the area of MS, which is such a black box. Well, I wanted to specify for the viewers that, well, the reason they would be injected into the cerebrospinal fluid is that, well, one of the main ways MS is diagnosed is doing well, MRIs are definitely high yield, of course, contrast and no contrast, but a lumbar puncture that would mostly find, for example, something like oligoclonal bands, like high oligoclonal bands in the cerebrospinal fluid, it points towards multiple sclerosis. It's not completely diagnostic of it, because you can see that in things like HIV or things, well, whatever, viral meningitis of sorts, etc. But I did want to point out that with MS specifically, and potentially ALS, right? You may have the tendency to develop excess antibodies to animal-derived peptide products. Now, that is not a normal thing. It is not a normal thing, but that's because sometimes in autoimmune conditions, you have a tendency to over-synthesize autoantibodies, and including antibodies against certain, well, when you extract peptides from a certain animal of sorts, there's antigens in there, okay? For example, with something like cerebrolysins, there is antigens. However, these antigens are not something you would normally develop antibodies to, or at least too many antibodies to. I have seen some cases where people without ALS did show increased autoantibody formation due to excessive cerebrolysin injection, right? I've seen it twice in person, once in myself, and once in some post on a forum of sorts that I forgot which one it is. But
yeah, so the thing with cerebrolysin is, Ali, that I have seen cases where the actual intact proteins, which some people incorrectly refer to as being found in cerebrolysin, such as NGF, or for instance, were given to ALS patients, and they develop antibodies to those. ALS patients develop antibodies to all kinds of things. I haven't personally seen anybody who has developed antibodies or increased their levels of antibodies as a result of taking cerebrolysin, but I will just say this. The cerebrolysin is sort of a different class of peptide, as it's a hydrolysis. So it's taking all of the proteins from the brain and it's hydrolyzing them in solution. It's breaking them up to form peptides. These are different, completely different than, say, a direct peptide extract, where you're not breaking up proteins in order to extract the peptides. You're just extracting the small chain peptides directly. That's what Khavinson's peptides are. And there's never been any case at all of worsening of autoimmune conditions or antibodies.
I would say that there's a near zero chance that happens with something like Pineolon or Visugen or Violon. Like you have these things in your body already. They're only doing good things, frankly, in your body. Of course, I'm sure there's Khavinson's peptides or maybe even undiscovered Khavinson's peptides that will be hammering some sort of growth signal or another. And those might be have deteriorating effects in certain cancers and whatnot. So we are not saying that all of it is so simple and just take Khavinson's peptides and that's the cure to everything. No, otherwise you wouldn't need any personalized help of any sorts, right? But for viewers, let's say if you are 20 to 40, okay, and you have a family history of autoimmune disease of sorts, I don't want to leave anybody here because we get a lot of comments saying like, oh, you guys just talk a lot about blah, 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 and you don't give us recommendations. Well, I will give you actually some prophylactic recommendations. Number one, very simply, stop eating so much garbage. Even if you're an athlete, even if you don't notice it, the whole if it fits your macros bullshit that I see online and Brendan sees online, it makes us furious. That is not how you diet. That is not how you stay in shape. That is how you slowly kill yourself, or quickly, depending on how you want to look at it.
It's a shame that's gotten so much mainstream attention because it's must have caused such massive repercussions to people's health as a result of that. People thinking that they can just eat whatever as long as it fits within their macronutrients without considering the fact that it may contain tons of various toxins and pesticides and preservatives and just garbage in it. You know what I mean? And that can definitely take a toll on your body. So
yeah, so that's one recommendation I would give prophylactically to people is don't eat so much garbage. I don't care if it fits your macros or not. Do not do that. Eat cleanly. And eating cleanly varies from one person to another, right? If I were to eat Brendan's diet, I would get all sorts of autoimmune symptoms, me personally. If Brendan eats my diet, he would get all sorts of endocrine dysfunction, right? Now, diets are individual and everybody has their own, well, I'm not saying my diet can't work for anybody else. No, but I'm saying people are divided into certain categories when it comes to dietary interventions and dietary lifestyles, really, that they would have to need to do perpetually for them to function at an optimal level and reduce risk massively of autoimmune disease, even if it is in your family, right? The other thing I would recommend...
there's definitely a lot of nuances there in terms of what diet is most beneficial for a particular type of person. But for anybody who is wondering, what is the best diet for them, or rather the best meal plan for them, we do have a product. It's called the Missing Link Complete Nutrition Guide. And this isn't a strict meal plan that's like a one size fits all. It helps you select the most optimal foods from different food groups and then incorporate them as an overall part of your diet. And it does take into account nuances, such as if you have diabetes, if you have an autoimmune condition, it pushes you in the right direction for the correct selection of the foods that will be most valuable for you. And if you're interested in this, I can put a link in the description and you can check that out. And sorry, Ali, you can continue.
Yeah, well, just another recommendations I would love to give. Let's say again, hypothetical male, female, 20 to 40, with a family history of autoimmune disease, trying to prevent it, right? Like we said, number one, watch out what you eat. Number two, I would say honestly, like 30 minutes of aerobic exercise a day. Everybody has the time for that. Everybody. Okay, and I would push that to an hour daily. That doesn't have to be anything severe. It just can be walking an hour daily. Just get off your ass. Okay, get off your ass, and that'll really help you against autoimmune diseases.
Actually, on that topic, Ali, I just wanted to say that there's been a study that has actually taken athletes' blood, and then they have taken different cancerous cell lines and they've put it in an athlete's blood compared to, say, a non-athlete's blood. And the athlete's blood has actually inhibited the growth of cancer versus the control, in which the cancer just continued to grow rapidly. And if you consider the fact that cancers do develop as a result of a dysfunctional or deregulated immune system, then it makes a lot more sense, that an athlete can have a much better immune system. But also on that topic, overdoing exercise to the point of an extreme level is the same thing as, say, having a lot of severe level stressors in your life. A certain amount is beneficial, but you can push your system into toxicity in which your immune system would take a decline. So that is another thing just to consider.
You will find amongst endurance runners that during the period, do their ultra marathons and whatnot, they may have zero symptoms of autoimmune disease of any kind. And then they would stop, and then their symptoms would start to come on. is that because chronic endurance running actually raises your cortisol levels chronically. And cortisol is what modern immunosuppressants, which are corticosteroids, is derived from, right? And like that's a suppression of the immune system long term. So in terms of athletics, I would say more explosive forms of athletic training, such as sprinting, are better than ultra marathon running. Now, endurance running is not bad for you. That's not what I'm saying at all. Those who push it to an extreme, like Brendan is saying, that can cause immunosuppression. And once you stop, that can cause immune hyperactivation after a lot of stress and damage to those cells. So, well, the immune system as a whole, and rheumatology, which is what this podcast is mostly about, you know, it's a conversation, short conversation really about rheumatology, because otherwise it could be, we would be here for 2 days talking if I wanted to, but we're not going to do that. But another recommendations I would have for the person who's 20 to 40, right, and trying to prevent autoimmune disease, stay on top of your zinc intake. Okay, so take zinc in the morning fasted, combine that with copper at night. So 1/10 of your zinc dose, take that in copper at night, roughly speaking. Okay, it could be 25 mg of zinc to 3 mg of copper. It could be 50 mg of zinc to 40 milligrams of mg of copper. It doesn't matter much. I would say cycling Bonocor and Thymosol, specifically those two, peptides.link/Bonocor, peptides.link/Thymosol, change H10 for 10% off. Okay, those doing cycles of those, let's say 6 months on and 2 to 4 months off, at the very least, if not taking them perpetually for life, you could just 2 capsules in the morning with your zinc. Okay, you will have very good results at prophylactically preventing autoimmune disease.
Yeah, and you know what? Another thing is that those athletes who are pushing themselves,
acetylglutathione, like Brendan said as well, 200 milligrams, let's say, per day.
Yeah, and I think those recommendations you gave, Ali, would also be very beneficial for athletes who are pushing themselves to the extreme level. You know what I mean? Because their immune system can become compromised in such conditions, and there are ways that you can counteract that, you know, with a lot of the recommendations that you have given. So very beneficial. And did you mention vitamin D? I'm not sure if you have, but
no, vitamin D, yes, absolutely. But we've had actually 2 separate cases with PSI, Brendan, where, I mean, I haven't told you about them because whatever, you know, you have your own things to do, but transformation clients that came to us with vitamin D levels of like in the 200, 260.
Oh, yeah.
One of them was because they take so much of it, they think it's great for you, or they inject like the ampules with 300,000 units like twice a month or something like that. And so vitamin D, you want to stay on top of it, sure, but if it's in the 40 to 60 range on your blood work, that's fine. You don't need to push it. You don't need to go to 70, 80 and then get yourself to 100 and, you know, push it too further. And I would say,
I agree. Yeah.
If you are taking vitamin D3, the supplements will give you, for example, like 5,000 units of vitamin D3 with like 100 micrograms of MK7 or something. I like a lot more than that MK7. I would do at least 5x that dose if you're taking 5,000 IUs of vitamin D3. And I would push that even further sometimes in certain situations. But yeah, as for, so there are infections, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, one other thing, Ali, before you move on, please, I just wanted to mention that the reason vitamin D is so beneficial for the immune system is because it's actually what's responsible for naive T cell maturation into functional matured T cells. So even if somebody was doing everything else right and they were taking, say, thymus peptides, their T cells won't actually mature if there is not enough vitamin D present. There's actually a receptor that's on your T cells. It's, I think, called PLC gamma 1, and vitamin D binds to this, and it's responsible for then increasing PLC gamma 1, which drives the maturation of the cell. Yeah,
it is PLC gamma 1 indeed.
Yeah.
Well, so I just wanted to tell the viewers that, look, in a lot of cases, it's not just the environmental toxins and genetic conditions that can induce autoimmune disease. So in a condition, like I said, one of the great imitators, which is tuberculosis, this is not an autoimmune disease of any sort. This is an infectious disease. And a lot of the time, people have primary tuberculosis which is, it's not even as bad as it sounds. It's the more dormant form that you can clear out later, but without it progressing to a secondary form that can cause all the horrible conditions. But in primary tuberculosis, a lot of the time people are asymptomatic, right? And then their immune systems either clear it out completely, or it sort of, quote unquote, metastasizes somewhere else, and then it clears it there. But that will result in further granuloma formation, and that can raise the risk of diseases like sarcoidosis, like rheumatoid arthritis, like psoriasis, psoriatic arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis even. So you do also want to be cognizant of the infections that you do have yourself. We are not saying that infections cannot raise risk of autoimmune disease directly in any way, shape, or form. We are saying that chronic viral infections do not play the highlighted and really exaggerated, frankly, pathogenic role in autoimmune diseases that they do seem to be blamed for, in my opinion and Brendan's opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree. And so I think that's about all we have to say there. There is one other interesting thing that I've come across in my research in regards to peptides, which is the fact that, reptiles, such as alligators, for instance, seem to have a very unique production of peptides, which maybe doesn't exist in mammals. And I've noticed this because I was reading some studies that showed that when you take an alligator's serum, for instance, and you put different types of harmful bacteria, which would normally be very deadly for a person, in the serum, all of the harmful bacteria was destroyed, including things such as E. coli, and I believe even other certain types of viral infections as well were just completely eliminated once they were put in the alligator serum. But what was interesting that proved that it was peptides responsible for this effect is that the effect was completely abolished when proteases were put into the solution. And proteases, for those who don't know, are something that actually cleave peptides. They break down the peptides that are in the solution. And so when these proteases were added, the serum was no longer able to do that job of destroying these pathogens. So it opens up another area of very interesting research potentially.
Antimicrobial peptides.
Yeah. Mammals produce antimicrobial peptides as well. We have LL37, which is a calcitonin, which is actually increased by in production through vitamin D supplementation, by the way. But reptiles seem to have a unique peptide profile, and it's uncertain whether these peptides in alligators, for instance, would even be safe for a mammal. There's a good chance that it would cause extreme level of destruction in a mammal. It's something that would have to be studied, in cell lines, in rodents and stuff first, and also determine, which ones are the most beneficial and most effective and the safest before it could ever potentially be used in humans, but it's an interesting area to research for the future for sure.
It's a very interesting area actually, and there's cultures that regularly eat reptile meat, and you have to cook that very well because they have symbiotic relationships with certain parasites and bacteria that we can't, and bacteria that would rapidly kill us, for example. So Brendan is not saying go and shoot up a snake's butt or anything like that. Brendan's mostly saying that potentially isolating and sequencing certain peptides that are found within reptilian blood could actually be potentially I would say antibiotic conjunctive treatments. We can get conjunctive treatments with antibiotics. We can form new antibiotics from that, potentially peptide-based antibiotics, right?
That is definitely a thing that may be actually very important in the future, because we do see that antibiotic resistance is on the rise, right? We only have so many different classes of antibiotics, and some bacteria that used to be effective towards a specific type of antibiotic no longer are. So our options are becoming less and less. And if these pathogens, these bacteria, become essentially evolved superbugs that are resistant to all of the antibiotics that we have at our disposal today, then we could be in a serious threat. That could be a big problem and a matter of life or death. So I think researching some of these peptides from, say, alligator serum or reptiles is a very important thing that we should be doing now before that ever potentially occurs, because I also saw that there was a multi-resistant staph, and
Yeah.
and
So
yeah, but alligator serum was also still able to destroy that, which is just very, very interesting.
is it was it MRSA or Versa?
Uh,
MRSA or VRSA?
it may have been MRSA, but please don't quote me on that because it's been quite a
Yeah,
while
well,
since I've looked into it.
just for viewer information, so Staphylococcus aureus is what he's referring to. Now, it used to be so that you could easily kill any staph infection with just amoxicillin or any penicillin derivative. And then we had the development of methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, which made us have to resort to vancomycin instead of penicillin derivatives or aminopenicillins, whatever. And then we had Versa, which is vancomycin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, for which we use something like linezolid, which is a very harsh antibiotic. So I definitely am a big fan of everything you just said in terms of potentially isolating peptides out of reptilian serum to combine them with milder antibiotics instead of like just prescribing here, take linezolid or meropenem or whatever. Even though, I mean, I am one of the physicians very guilty of increasing bacterial resistance because I mean, I do use them quite liberally, especially when you would suspect an infection and you don't have time to culture it and you want to save that one patient. You do prescribe antibiotics, and that is causing a lot of resistance. But another thing I forgot to mention for the person who's 20 to 40 trying to stay not get any autoimmune disease, stay the fuck away from seed oils. Okay, they are gonna make your cell membranes pathetically permeable. Same with your mitochondrial membranes. They're gonna make cardiolipin practically kind of like a soldier on two crutches trying to fight a war.
Yeah.
Okay, they're doing that. Everybody who tells you that they are not doing that is a liar or an idiot or both. Okay, and the only studies where you see them not doing harm to cells or humans is epidemiological studies that are very highly suspect. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, linoleic acid, which primarily is found in seed oils, is responsible for a lot of cardiolipin, the inner mitochondrial membrane. It does accumulate there at a certain percentage, and I'm sure that a certain percentage is required, but if you're consuming tons of seed oils high in linoleic acid and the composition of cardiolipin becomes like 100% linoleic acid, that's when you can like run into issues,
It'll never be truly 100% because cardiolipin can be made of the linoleic acid becomes a part of the structure of cardiolipin. But honestly, when someone replaces, let's say, their seed oils with something even like lard, which does have linoleic acid in it, just at a much lower percentage than seed oils, which is basically all linoleic acid, frankly, almost. Now that is where you start to run into a lot of trouble, and I'm not gonna name names, right? But J.E.'s homeboy, okay, he was making fun of everybody who wanted to warn against these products, okay? And these are multi-billion, if not multi-hundred of billion, if not trillion-dollar industries out there, okay? So those epidemiological studies are really not that hard to fake for that much. I could fake one if you give me $1 billion, but I will never, because I'm not a piece of shit, right?
Yeah. And also, Ali, if you remember, I think both of us have done a video on seed oils that was very thorough in the past, and we have a blog article as well, which should be published at the peptidescienceinstitute.com. And this blog article will include a bunch of scientific references as well as a very thorough explanation on some of the things that we touched on here. So for those who do want more information, I highly recommend you go to our website, peptidescienceinstitute.com, go to the resources section and look for that seed oils article. And yeah, I think that just about sums everything up. And for those who are interested in learning more about peptides, which were sort of the star of today's talk, then you can also check the link in the description or go to the peptidescienceinstitute.com. We do have the world's most scientifically accurate book on peptides that has ever been written. It's called Peptide Salvation, and it covers over 100 peptides, I believe 111 in scientifically accurate detail, and it's based on 1,207 studies, which can be included if you would like them to be included. You'll have an option at the checkout for that. But you could check the link in the description for that book as well. It's about 800 pages. Very thorough on peptides. If you truly want to understand peptides at a level that nobody else does, then I highly recommend you check out that book. And for those who want to take things a step further, we do have a peptide mastery course, which covers all of the Khavinson's bioregulator peptides, in addition to other peptides and more than what's in the book. It has, in total, 130 some peptides that are covered there. It includes all the 1,207 studies, which the material in the course is made up of. It has about 24 hours of video content. And for those who don't want to just be able to master peptides knowledge and be able to use that knowledge to create the best stacks for themselves, the course also includes 57 peptide protocols. These protocols are designed for specific purposes, and one of them may apply to your situation. And it also includes a quick reference and dosing sheet for all 130 some peptides, so you'll know exactly what that peptide does, which major systems in the body it targets, as well as the exact dosages used in human studies that were most effective. And in cases where a peptide hasn't been studied in humans, it will take the rodent's dose and do a human equivalent dose from that, and it will list that specific dose in the chart. So instead of just giving standard recommendations for doses like a lot of other people do, we actually wanted to make sure that everything that we say is founded upon science, and what's in the literature, what has actually been proven to be most effective. And that's exactly what we give you in that chart, which is just such an incredible resource for somebody to look at and just know how to dose something, right away. And yeah, check the link in the description for that.
For Peptide Salvation, ladies and gentlemen, it is not just a book for clinicians. We've made sure to include sections for the layman and sections with advanced information for clinicians or practitioners of sorts, or even enthusiasts, right? But everybody can actually get the book and benefit tremendously, no matter your level of knowledge in biology, no matter how much of a beginner or expert you are, it doesn't matter. Everybody will benefit from it. Everybody on planet Earth.
Yes. Very well said, Ali. And thank you for being here to talk about the immune system today. I hope that everybody watching has found some of this to be valuable. And yeah, that's all.